Now we are going to deal with the last topic in neuroanatomy, and that is the functional columns of cranial nerves. So before going to the details of the functional columns of cranial nerves, you should know some details about the functional columns of spinal nerves also. So what do you mean by the term functional columns? To cranial nerve or spinal nerve, it is that function that has been assigned or carried out by each cranial nerve or spinal nerve. So when you're talking about the functional component of a spinal nerve, it is four: somatic efferent, visceral efferent, somatic efferent, and visceral efferent. So when I am describing it, it seems to be a bit difficult, but it's very easy. Just remember it like that. Think of the functions that a spinal nerve does. It has got an efferent pathway or efferent fiber and an efferent pathway. Efferent means sensory. Efferent means sensory fibers. Efferent means motor fibers. So for a spinal nerve, two types of motor fibers or motor fibers. One is going to innervate the structures in the soma or skeletal muscles present in the body wall, and that is what is termed as somatic efferent. So look at that term. The first functional column of a spinal nerve is somatic efferent. That means efferent or motor fibers going to supply the skeletal muscles of soma or body wall and limbs. So that is the first column, somatic efferent. Next one is visceral efferent. Efferent again means motor that is going to supply the viscera. That means that is the autonomic outflow. Autonomic outflow that is going to the glands, smooth muscles like that. So these two are the components, the efferent component of a spinal nerve. Somatic efferent, and second one is visceral efferent. Visceral efferent means efferent to viscera. Fine. Just like that, you have got two efferent or sensory fibers also. One is somatic efferent. Next one is visceral efferent. So now with these names, you can say the function that is done by these two components of spinal nerves. Somatic efferent will be carrying the sensation from the body wall. Second one is visceral efferent. That is the visceral sensation or the pain sensation, other sensation from the viscera is being transmitted by this part of the spinal nerve. Or in short, the spinal nerve has got four functional components. Fine. So look at that. Now you are seeing a spinal nerve. You are seeing the spinal nerve, and this is the visceral root. You are seeing the visceral part here. I'm sorry, you are seeing this is the ventral root. This is the ventral root, otherwise termed as the motor root. This is the, what is this? Dorsal part, otherwise dorsal root, otherwise termed as the sensory root. These two join to form the spinal nerve, which has got two efferent and two efferent functional columns. Hope that is clear to you. Okay. So read that. The four functional components of a spinal nerve: somatic efferent, visceral efferent, somatic efferent, and visceral efferent. So now we come to the cranial nerves. What are the functional components you find for the cranial nerves? So you should remember, cranial nerves have got 7 functional components. Out of this, 3 is motor, 4 is sensory. Fine. Read that list. Somatic efferent, special visceral efferent, general visceral efferent, general visceral efferent, special visceral efferent, general somatic efferent, special somatic efferent. When I am reading the list like that, you must be thinking, oh, such a long list, so tough. No, it's very easy to understand once you know certain basic concepts in that. Fine. So I'll make that clear to you. Then you will be able to list all the cranial nerves and its functional components. Fine? Okay. So I said the cranial nerves, you have got 12 cranial nerves, 12 pair of cranial nerves, and each cranial nerve will not be having all these functional components. Depending upon the function carried out, each cranial nerve will be having 3 or 4, or some may be having 2 of these 7 functional components, or in short, these are the 7 functional components you find for a cranial nerve. So out of this, 3 is motor and 4 is sensory. First 3 that I have mentioned, that is motor, that is somatic efferent, SVE special visceral efferent, GVE general visceral efferent. That much is motor, rest 4 is sensory. So now, before going to the details, for a better understanding, you should know some details in the development of CNS, so that these functional columns becomes easy for you. Shall I enumerate that? Okay. So you know the brain and the spinal cord is developing from where? It's from the neural tube. So you are seeing the neural tube marked there. You are seeing the neural tube, and you are seeing the roof of the neural tube. Then you have seen the floor of the neural tube, and this is the lateral wall. So this lateral wall is being divided into a ventral part, that is what is termed as the basal plate or basal lamina, and a dorsal part termed as the alar lamina or alar plate. So remember, this basal plate is always motor and alar plate is sensory. Fine. So this is the change. This is how you find the spinal cord is developing. Now what happens is, what is the change that is occurring to the neural tube in the hindbrain? This is a section showing the hindbrain, and in the hindbrain, you must be familiar with the pontine flexure happening to the hindbrain. And then what happens is, this is your basal lamina. This green colored structure is the basal lamina. This is the alar lamina. Alar lamina actually should lie here dorsally. And now, as a result of the pontine flexure in the hindbrain, what happens is, this alar lamina comes to lie lateral to the basal lamina, just as if you are opening a book. You got it? This alar lamina comes to lie lateral to the basal lamina, and this part now forms the fourth ventricle. So now what you see is, in the center you are seeing the median sulcus, and then you find this is your basal lamina, that is motor or representing the motor columns. The alar lamina here, that is representing the sensory columns, and these two are represented or is separated by sulcus limitans. Fine. Now what happens is, this column, your basal lamina, now gets split into 3 functional components throughout the length of the brainstem, and like that your alar lamina will be split to form 4 functional components throughout the length of the brainstem. So this is how it looks like during development. In the midline, in the middle, you are seeing the dotted line, and that is your median sulcus. Then on either side of that, look at that, on either side you are seeing the sulcus limitans. So between this median sulcus and sulcus limitant, this much part, are you appreciating that? This much part is the basal lamina, where you find the motor columns are developing, and lateral to that, this whole part, this is the alar lamina, where you find the sensory components are developing. Fine. So now look at that. This is what we have seen before. In the median sulcus you are seeing here, that part, the median part, you are seeing This is your basal lamina represented by 3 functional columns. This is your alar lamina represented by 4 functional columns. And the first component you see there close to the midline. Now I am talking about the efferent column. The first one is somatic efferent, marked as red. That column is the somatic efferent. Next one, marked as violet color, is special visceral efferent, SVE. Third column is GVE, general visceral efferent. Don't get confused, it's very simple. I'll make it in a simplified manner. Now just remember, you have got 7 columns, 3 motor, 4 sensory. That much is clear to you? Fine. Now we are going to the efferent part where we are going to deal with the 3 columns. First is somatic efferent. Second one is SVE, special visceral efferent. Third one is general visceral efferent. Fine. So the first one I'm going to deal with is somatic efferent. It's very simple. The first one, somatic efferent. When I'm saying somatic efferent, by viewing that term itself, you could say the function of that component. What is it? It is efferent. Efferent means what? Motor. Motor to what? It is somatic efferent. So, motor to the structures that is derived from soma or somites. What of somites? In the head and neck region, you find 2 structures are derived from the somites, and that is the extraocular muscles and muscles of tongue. These 2 structures are derived from somites. So, efferent to the structures that is derived from somites. So, I already said it is the extraocular muscles and muscles of tongue. So now you can say the nerves that is going and supplying the extraocular muscles, what are they? They are 3, 4 and 6. Do you remember that? When extraocular muscles were taught to you, you were remembering that formula. All the muscles or all the extraocular muscles are supplied by oculomotor nerve except what? LR6SO4, lateral rectus supplied by 6 and SO, superior oblique by 4. All else or others supplied by oculomotor nerve, or in short, the extraocular muscles are supplied by 3, 4, 6. What about the muscles of tongue? The muscles of tongue, you should be familiar. They are derived, actually developing from the occipital somites. And they are supplied by which nerve? You already studied it. Which nerve? It is the 12th cranial nerve. So, somatic efferent represented by 3, 4, 6, 12. Very easy. You understood? So, I'll revise it once more. Somatic efferent. Split the word and say the meaning. It is efferent to the structures that is derived from somites. So, what are they? They are the extraocular muscles and muscles of tongue. So, which all cranial nerves? Which all cranial nerve nuclei? The nuclei of 3rd, 4th, 6th and 12th will be representing in the SE column. That much is clear to you? So we have finished the first component of motor, SE, somatic efferent. Now we are going to the second component, that is the special visceral efferent. So this SVE, once you hear the term SVE, the next word that you should remember is pharyngeal arches or branchial arches. That you should never forget. SVE means they are those structures that is derived from the mesoderm of the pharyngeal arches. SVE, pharyngeal arches. So now it's very easy. You remember the pharyngeal arches? The first pharyngeal arch was being supplied by mandibular nerve. So the functional column or the functional nucleus will be represented in the motor nucleus of trigeminal nerve. Fine. Second arch nerve was facial nerve. So the nucleus representing it will be the motor nucleus of the facial nerve. Then you have got the third, fourth and sixth arch supplied by 9, 10, 11. So these three together is represented as a common nucleus, and that is what is termed as nucleus ambiguous. Fine. Nucleus ambiguous is present in medulla. So these are the three functional columns or the three parts of SVE. Very easy. You understood? So I'll rewind it once more. SVE. The next thing that should come to your mind is what? Pharyngeal arches. So if it is pharyngeal arches, you can very well say the nucleus that is representing the nerves. First arch was mandibular nerve. So the nucleus representing SVE component will be the motor nucleus of trigeminal. Second, facial. So the motor nucleus of facial. Then you have got the third, fourth and sixth arch by 9, 10, 11 together termed as the nucleus ambiguous that is going to supply the three arches. Fine. Nucleus ambiguous will be fine. Or you see them in medulla. Fine. So how far we have reached now? How many functional columns were there? 7. How many motor? How many sensory? 3 motor, 4 sensory. Name the motor. SE, then SVE, then GVE. SE was somatic efferent. What does it mean? Efferent to structures that is derived from somites. Name the cranial nerve nuclei. 3, 4, 6, 12. Why? Because they are those structures that is derived or represented by extraocular muscles and muscles of tongue. Good. Then GVE we'll discuss next. What we finished was SVE. Once you hear the term SVE, the next word that should come to your mind is what? Pharyngeal arches. That you should never forget. SVE, pharyngeal arches, special visceral efferent pharyngeal arches. So what are the components or what are nuclei will be represented in that column? The motor nucleus of trigeminal nerve, the motor nucleus of facial nerve and nucleus ambiguous. That much is clear to you? Okay. So now we come to the last part of the motor system, and that is GVE. GVE means general visceral efferent. Just I have said just before in the previous slide I have mentioned SVE. The next word that should come to your mind is pharyngeal arches. Just like that, GVE, the next word that should come to your mind is it is connected with preganglionic parasympathetic outflow. GVE, general visceral efferent, means it is being connected with preganglionic parasympathetic outflow. You have already studied them. Do you remember the 4 peripheral parasympathetic ganglion in head and neck? Name them. 1. Ciliary ganglion. Next one, optic ganglion, pterygopalatine ganglion, submandibular ganglion. Are you remembering that? These are the 4 peripheral parasympathetic ganglion in head and neck. So, the nerve fibers, each cranial nerve will come and end. The preganglionic fibers will come and end in this parasympathetic ganglion, and from there you have the postganglionic fibers that is going to innervate the corresponding gland. So these preganglionic fibers will originate from these nucleus that I am going to mention, which represents the GVE component of the functional column. So GVE means it is that part that is connected with preganglionic parasympathetic outflow. So first one is Edinger-Westphal nucleus. Edinger-Westphal nucleus means it is connected with oculomotor nerve, third nerve. So from there you find that nucleus is present in midbrain. From there, via the oculomotor nerve, the preganglionic fibers will come and relay in which ganglion? Do you remember? It is the ciliary ganglion. And from the ciliary ganglion, you have got the postganglionic fibers that is going to supply what all structures? That is the sphincter, pupilla, and ciliaris muscle. So that is the first part, Edinger-Westphal nucleus of third nerve. Next is superior and inferior salivatory nucleus connected with 7 and 9 cranial nerves. You have already heard this. Just rewind your memory. Superior salivatory nucleus. From there, via the 7th nerve, you find the preganglionic fibers coming and relaying in the submandibular ganglion. From there, you have the postganglionic fibers via the lingual nerve. You find it is going and supply the submandibular and sublingual gland. Fine. Very close to the superior salivatory nucleus, you find the lacrimatory nucleus also, which is going to supply the lacrimal gland. Fine. Next is the inferior salivatory nucleus that is related to 9th nerve. So what happens is, from the inferior salivatory nucleus via the 9th nerve, glossopharyngeal nerve, the preganglionic fibers will come and enter which ganglion? Remember, it is the otic ganglion. From there, via the auriculotemporal nerve, you find the postganglionic fibers are going to supply the parotid gland, or in short, GVE means it is that part that is concerned with preganglionic parasympathetic outflow. Fine. One more nucleus is there, and that is the dorsal nucleus of vagus that gives the parasympathetic outflow to the thoracic and abdominal viscera. So now it's very simple. GVE, what are they? Edinger-Westphal nucleus, superior and inferior salivatory nucleus, very close to superior salivatory nucleus, the lacrimatory nucleus also of 7th, and then you find the dorsal nucleus of vagus. So with that, we have finished the different columns of efferent. Shall I rewind it once more? So first one is SE, that representing, that marked as red, SE. You find what are the structures present in SE or somatic efferent? Efferent to somites. What are they? Extraocular muscles, muscles of tongue. So 3, 4, 6, 12. That's the reason why you can see it's marked there. 3, 4, 6, 12. Then SVE. Once you hear the term SVE, what is the next thing that should come to your mind is pharyngeal arches. So what are those structures? The motor nucleus of trigeminal, the motor nucleus of facial, 9, 10, 11 you find together represented as nucleus ambiguous in medulla. Now the third component, blue, that is a GVE, general visceral efferent. What is the next word that should come to your mind once you think of GVE? It is that part that is concerned with preganglionic parasympathetic outflow. So what are they? Edinger-Westphal nucleus in the midbrain that is going to supply the ciliary ganglion. Then superior and inferior salivatory nucleus represented by 7th and 9th cranial nerve. Then in the medulla you find the dorsal nucleus of vagus. So I think now you are familiar with all the 3 components. So just try to answer these questions. The number of functional columns represented by cranial nerve nuclei is 3, 5, 7, 9. What's the answer? It's a total number I'm asking. What is it? It's 7. Okay. The number of following nerves, the nuclei of the following nerves belonging to the somatic efferent column, except the nuclei of the following nerves belong to the somatic efferent column, except it is a somatic efferent column, except what are they? Oculomotor nerve, trochlear nerve, abductor nerve, facial nerve, hypoglossal nerve. What's the answer? It is facial. Somatic efferent represented by 3, 4, 6 and 12. So the answer is facial. Third one. The nerves belonging to SVE, special visceral efferent, supply the muscles that is derived or developing from, what is it? Somites, pharyngeal arches, somatopleuric mesoderm, both A and C. What's the answer? It is the pharyngeal arches. Fine. So I think now you know the structures and the efferent column and an introduction to your development also. So I think I'll stop here, and in the next session I'll deal with the efferent column. Hope this much is clear to you. Fine. So I'll stop. Okay, thank you.